I'm reading from Exodus chapter 9. This is God speaking to Pharaoh. By now, I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. So here's the dynamic that it seems to be at work. God sees that Pharaoh does not want to obey. Every time God displays his miraculous power and Pharaoh turns aside from it, his heart grows heavier and hardened and more resistant to subsequent messages. So as the miracles and the damage caused to Egypt keeps ramping up, Pharaoh's heart keeps getting hardened and hardened and hardened to the gospel message. I'm using that figuratively, but to God's calling voice. Now, what God says, at a certain point, those miracles become so devastating to the nation of Egypt that just simple prudence, like a basic understanding of being wise, would tell Pharaoh to back off. And at that point, it says that God strengthened Pharaoh's heart. So Pharaoh wanted to keep going, wanted to keep fighting, wanted to keep being prideful and stubborn. And so God gave him the courage to make a stupid decision and keep nosediving Egypt into national ruin. And all the way out to chase the Israelites and then to dive into the Red Sea. Dumb decisions. No normal thinking king would make those decisions. But what the balance between what the scripture says is happening is that Pharaoh was prideful and obstinate, but God kept pushing him to the brink. He pushed himself, and then once the brink was too terrible to even consider keep going, God kept pushing him. So never does it suggest that God overrode what Pharaoh wanted to do. God gave Pharaoh the courage to make a dumb decision that he already wanted to make. And then what the reason why, what the scripture is saying, is that God could have done it all in one swipe and just judged them. But in order to make his power known, God kept amping up the miracles and displayed all 10 plagues on Egypt and used Pharaoh's pride to show his own glory.
So did Pharaoh get to a point of no return? Because, like we said in the intro of this video, this brings up questions of God's fairness and his goodness. Why would God continue to push Pharaoh to the brink of doing something really stupid?
To your point, that's exactly what Romans chapter 9 is trying to say. And Paul is quoting the exact verse I read from Exodus chapter 9. The scripture says to Pharaoh, for this same purpose I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and my name might be declared through all the earth. Why would you talk back to God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why did you make me this way? What if God, wanting to show his wrath, to make his power known, endured with much long suffering vessels of wrath fitted to destruction? Pharaoh was already a vessel of wrath fit to destruction. God actually endured longer the suffering of his people to show his glory in Pharaoh's judgment. But it wasn't about making Pharaoh a vessel fitted to destruction. He already was. And God put up with it for longer to show his miraculous power through the miracles in Egypt.
Seems like he allowed Pharaoh to do what he wanted to do.
Yes. So this I think truly is the paradox. God doesn't always get what he wants. He would have wanted Pharaoh to make the right choice and rule with kindness, but he caused suffering in his people. So God always gets what he wants. You don't always choose the thing he wants, but when he acts, he's always going to get some glory out of what you do. So God doesn't always get what he wants, but he's always going to get what he wants. He's always going to get glory from whatever action you choose, even if the action you choose is not what he wanted.
So God did harden Pharaoh's heart, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he made Pharaoh do something he didn't already want to do.
Exactly. What I think Romans 9 is saying is that God put up with Pharaoh's own stubbornness and his own choices for longer for his own glory.
To display his power, his goodness.
So that we could have that story of the 10 miracles in Egypt and the Red Sea.
So God saw an opportunity to display his glory through Pharaoh's disobedience rather than obedience to the voice of God.
And he didn't have to change anybody's will to make that happen.
That's dope. It's just like that whole idea of, even though God gives us free choice, that he's both, and that shows his goodness, that he's still powerful enough to weave history together to have certainty of an outcome, a good outcome, regardless of if we want to join in with his purposes or oppose his purposes. It just displays his magnificence that he's still able to do that, and really elevates who he is. Wow, our God must be so good and so powerful to be able to give everyone free choice and still have the power to weave and have his hand in things and use willing vessels, willing people who want to surrender their life to Jesus in order to fulfill his purposes. It's a really wild and honestly just such there's so much reverence in that thought. There's so much awe and wonder in how that's even possible.
And which one makes a more glorious, greater God? The God who has all the actors playing the parts he wants on the stage, or the God who can write history in the making as it's happening with people who don't necessarily want to do what he wants to do, but who are inviting people freely to participate in the future that he's creating.
Yeah.
And even despite people being against him, he is still the master and Lord of all of history.
Yeah.
Which one is a greater God? And I think the Lord who can utilize people, even if they're against him, is the greatest God of all.